Thank you to our channel sponsors, Jet.Build. If you're looking for ways to better manage your real estate development and construction projects, look no further. Jet is the command center software for end-to-end real estate development and construction management. That's www.jet.build. Joe, thanks so much for joining us today. It's truly an honor to have you on the show.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Adam. Happy to be here.
Thank you. Awesome. Where are you calling in from? Where's home base for you?
I'm in my office right now in Waltham, Massachusetts. My home base is in Boston.
Awesome. That's great. Okay, Joe, I'm going to start off with your formal introduction. Joseph Albanese retired as Commodore, 7th Naval Construction Regiment, Newport, Rhode Island in 2009 after 28 years of active and reserve duty. Joe is a captain in the United States Navy Civil Engineer Corps. In 2007, Joe mobilized to the Middle East for 10 months, serving as Commander, 22nd Naval Construction Regiment, forward deployment, and commander of Expeditionary Task Group 56.2. Joe provided leadership to more than 2,200 Navy Seabees throughout Iraq, Afghanistan, Kuwait, Bahrain, and the Horn of Africa. Joe's numerous military awards include the Legion of Merit, 2 Meritorious Service Medals, and 4 Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medals. Today, Joe is the founder and CEO of Commodore Builders, a 22-year-old, $550 million construction management and general contracting firm. Joe is a registered professional engineer with a degree in civil engineering from UMass Lowell and an MBA from BU. Joe serves on numerous boards, including the board of directors of the New England Baptist Hospital, the board of advisors of UMass Lowell Francis College of Engineering, the Dean's Advisory Board for the Boston University Questrom School of Business, and the board of directors for the Village Bank in Newton. Joe is past chairman of the board for the New England Center and Home for Veterans, Leading Cities, Associated General Contractors of Massachusetts, and the Massachusetts Building Congress. In 2018, Governor Baker appointed Joe as Chief Recovery Officer, leading the disaster recovery and restoration efforts following the gas line explosions impacting 3 municipalities in the Merrimack Valley. Joe took a 3-month leave of absence from Commodore to assemble and lead a team that put more than $750 million of work in place, ensuring that all residents and businesses were restored before winter. Joe has been inducted into the UMass Lowell James B. Francis Academy of Distinguished Engineers, the UMass Lowell Military Hall of Fame, and the National Academy of Construction. Joe, I am out of breath.
Well, it's interesting. You know, it's easy to put it on paper because, well, I'm not young anymore. I'm 62, so things add up over time. But it's not easy to listen to. So I apologize to all of the people who are listening to the podcast.
No, it's amazing to listening to, and it's inspiring to do so. And with that, let's learn about how you accomplished all these things, starting from childhood, where you grew up, and what led you to service.
Well, so I was born in Fort Benning, Georgia. My dad was in the Army for a couple of years, but that really wasn't a huge part of my life. And I was 6 months old when I left Fort Benning, and it's no longer called Fort Benning, by the way. But I left Fort Benning and moved back to the New England area where my parents were from, settling at the age of 5 in Newton, Massachusetts, where I ultimately lived there for 50 years, you know, leaving for college and military service and whatnot, but that was my home base. Mm-hmm. And there was really nothing about my childhood that, really associated me with the military per se. My dad was not, we weren't a military family. Newton, Massachusetts is not the heartland of America. It's, and, you know, there aren't any there's not a significant military presence nearby. There are some bases, and over time there are fewer and fewer bases as they've gone through Bracken closing down. But what really piqued my interest with the military was paying for college. And not many people know this, but my entree in the military was not in the Navy. But I was a musician. I played the saxophone in the Air National Guard band and jazz band, and and with that was able to attend college free, and so that was my indoctrination. I went to Air Force boot camp at the age of 19 and served only about 2.5 years, 2 years, 10 months with the Air Force.
Mhm.
When that was really my indoctrination into the military. Um, and I was not a remarkable airman. I was, uh, if you knew me in high school, you'd wonder if I would ever be in the military, and be surprised that I spent 28 years in the military. But I think that through my experience at boot camp and just in that military way of life, I was introduced to some opportunities in the Navy and the Air Force civil engineer programs.
Mm.
And I matriculated into the Navy from the Air Force into an officer program that, again, helped me pay for college and get through school. And one of the reasons why I got into the Navy at the time was because my dad was uh, an executive in construction in Boston. I worked for his firm, not his firm, the firm he worked for, through college. And I began to realize how small Boston really was, and the shadow that my father had created. He had a big deal, a big job, and was, I was his son, and it was a great place to be. But I really wanted to forge my own thing for a little while and develop my own reputation.
Mm.
Um, and he respected that. So I joined the Navy Civil Engineer Corps, left Boston, spent a couple of years in Sicily, managing construction projects for the Navy, and then in New Orleans, Louisiana, and then really wanted to come back to Boston because I wanted to get into the civilian sector and do, build my reputation in the construction and real estate industry in Boston. Uh,
So, so
you know,
expanding a little bit on kind of those early phases of your military career, what was it like one transitioning from the Air Force to the Navy, and what was it like kind of transitioning from, I guess, a regular soldier to an officer?
well, I mean, the Air Force and the Navy. I mean, the Navy band was, it had a different kind of a mission than a combatant or a engineering or a operational
Mhm.
mission. So, and again, I was not really serious about my Air Force music career. It was a means to an end for me. But I did get serious about my Navy career
Mhm.
because now I was a full-time naval officer. And it started to shape a lot of who I am, a lot of my values, a lot of my priorities. I learned a lot from the people around me, from the people that I reported to. I learned a lot about good leadership. I learned a lot about bad leadership and what to emulate and what not to emulate. Um, but my I was struck when I got off of active duty, and particularly having been on active duty overseas. When you're in an overseas command, the wardroom, the um, camaraderie of families, really, it was the work and social and home life was all kind of intertwined. People really depended upon each other a lot more than just for the 8 to 10 hours a day that they were in their office together. And
Mhm.
so when I got off of active duty and started to go to work, I was struck by the distinct difference between the people I worked with and the people I hung around with.
Mhm.
And that social difference is profound. And for someone who spends their career in the military, I can understand how that would be complicated as they matriculate into the civilian workforce, and they see that it's just work. And while there's a lot about companies and culture and all that kind of stuff, it's still not the same interdependency that
Mhm.
you have when you're in the military and really depending upon not just your performance for job and mission, but also your um, dependence upon each other for your families and for your well-being.
Mhm. So in that position when you were building in Italy, were you an officer at that time already?
I was an ensign, an O1
Mhm.
in Sicily and I'm 100% Sicilian. My family's all from Sicily, so it was a
Mhm.
very special time in my life at the age of 22 to be able to reconnect with my roots and meet my descendants, my family, my cousins that I still stay in touch with today.
Hmm. Wow,
Yeah.
that's an amazing experience and connection point.
Mm.
It sounded like you already had at that point of your life, some experience working in construction. Is that the case with your dad?
I did. Yeah, my dad was a construction executive. My
Mm-hmm.
grandfather was a construction laborer. So my role in the Navy Civil Engineer Corps and the Naval Construction Forces was a natural fit
Right.
for me, and it really helped to hone the skills I already had and develop them. But I brought a lot to the table for them as well.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. I was going to ask if you felt kind of like that overlap, and it sounds like you did. So that's awesome. And becoming an officer, was that a part of you continuing your education and signing for officer school?
It did. It was. I mean, I was a
Mm-hmm.
junior in college when I changed from the Air Force to the Navy. The Navy Civil Engineer Corps had a collegiate program where they would actually pay you. I actually became an active duty, um, active duty E3 in the Navy, and my job was to finish my college education. So I was getting paid full time
Mm-hmm.
to finish my college degree, and then once I finished my college degree, I became commissioned. In 1984, I was commissioned. And then I went through some officer schools in Newport, Rhode Island, and Civil Engineer Corps Officer School in Port Hueneme, California, before I ended up at my first duty station, which was Sigonella, Sicily, for 2 years. And that was an interesting time in Sicily. Um, the Navy was going through some real changes with the U.S.'s relationship with NATO, and some decreased presence in places like Greece and Spain, and Sicily became the hub of the Mediterranean, a very strategic um, landing and mounting out place on the way to the Middle East. And as a 22-year-old, we put several $100 million worth of construction work in place on those bases each year that I was there. So it was a really dynamic time, and a time when I learned a lot. I was there when they had the Achille Lauro, incident. You're probably too young to remember, but it was a major terrorist time. Gaddafi and Libya at the time was at odds with the United States and was lobbing bombs our way, and it was a dynamic time. And there was a hijacked TWA airliner and a serviceman that was murdered, and they actually brought that plane down on our base in 1985. So it was a dynamic time to be there.
Yeah, wow.
And I learned a lot. I learned a lot, and I grew up a lot. I think that really helped me to understand the seriousness of what I was involved with, and and my role as a military officer.
So in finishing that deployment, when you got back home, were you able to already kind of recognize, all right, I came into this first, kind of position and deployment as an officer. I have this background in construction and family ties to it, culture, etc. Now I just finished that deployment. Were you able to kind of pull takeaways in terms of how military supported kind of your prior knowledge to construction?
Um, you know, not so much about construction, but more so about leading people and again motivating people. My military background has really made me so much more effective as a CEO. When I founded Commodore Builders in 2002, at that point in time, I was a Navy commander, and I was very involved with the Naval Construction Forces. It was, if you remember, 2002, we were at war. And as a operations officer for a Naval Construction Regiment, I was deeply involved with training and mobilizing naval construction battalions, reserve naval construction battalions to war, and doing that as a part-time job. And there were years from 2002 to when I retired in 2009, when I would spend more than 170, 180 days on Navy duty in a working year. And when you think about that, that's much more than just a part-time job.
Yeah.
The Naval Construction Forces is one of the most integrated forces, active reserve in the military. 2/3 of the force is the reserve force, and when their demand signal increases in times of contingency or war, they really lean on their reserve capability to scale. And it was a very, very busy time, but it was also a time when, as I was progressing from commander to captain, I was involved with the board of directors for the Naval Construction Forces, again, integrated active reserve. And I would go to quarterly meetings in places like, Port Hueneme, California, Norfolk, Virginia, Gulfport, Mississippi, with 30 or 40 Navy leaders and Marine Corps leaders, and really, talking about the future of the Naval Construction Forces, talking about our mission, our demand, talking about improving our capabilities, and I would come back to work after 3 or 4 days of that just infusion of high level knowledge and really smart people with incredible motivation and great ideas to apply to my own business. And sometimes the people in my executive team would be afraid about what I was going to come back with next.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But for the most part, they really understood and bought into it and saw, not just my excitement, but my resolve to really improve Commodore builders, but to apply some of these principles from the Naval Construction Forces and the military.
Amazing. So before getting too far ahead of ourselves in your story, going back to kind of where I asked that question, which is you finished your deployment to Italy, you got home. What happens next from there?
Well, I mean, I got home and it really, you call it a deployment. I mean, I wasn't married. I didn't have any children. I was a single naval officer living a great life in Sicily. I mean, it was a really wonderful time in my life. I didn't have a care in the world. And I was living in a villa there. I wasn't in a tent. I was going to work every day. And so it wasn't easy being away from my family. I mean, it was that in 1984, there weren't cell phones. I didn't talk to people regularly. We depended on mail, letters. I mean, I didn't even have electronic fund transfers. I got a paper check every week. There weren't ATMs. I mean, it was a different time. We didn't have computers. We were using not even faxes, telex. That was 1984. I mean, fast forward to today. When I was in the Middle East, I left my business and went to the Middle East in 2007. I'm sorry I left my company for about 10 months, but I was able to connect with emails and, in the Middle East. And so
world different.
Right.
Yeah. So coming back home from being in Italy, what happens next in kind of the trajectory of your career?
Well, first I had to lose about 10 pounds because I ate too much pasta in Italy. But then I went from Italy to New Orleans, Louisiana, to a duty station. I had a girlfriend and we kept a serious relationship for that point in time. One of the reasons why I wanted to get back from New Orleans at that time was to get married, and start a family. But, New Orleans was, again, the same kind of thing. I was in a military uniform, but I did a job that was largely a civilian job. I mean, I was managing construction on bases. I was working with a lot of military people. My clients were all military. I was, my great friends and great relationships there. I wasn't training daily and deploying daily. I mean, more of my military experience with the Naval Construction Forces came after I got off of active duty and affiliated with the Reserve Naval Construction Forces. And that's where I really got the, deploy with the Marines, brigade, company, troop leadership. That was all more in the reserve than it was in active, because my active duty jobs for the 4 years I was on active duty were a lot more office oriented and a lot less tactical and military oriented.
Mm-hmm. So this New Orleans period is still active duty.
That was active duty. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
I
Well,
started
we're
my MBA at Tulane.
mm-hmm.
I was, I was going to school at night, but we weren't. It was a Monday through Friday job, and I wasn't deploying anywhere there.
Okay.
So, yeah. But
Well,
we did experience the community
sure.
of military families that were all from all over the place that had these bonds that were that really pervade much more than just an 8-hour day.
Mm-hmm. So what were some things you were building there?
Well, we were building administrative facilities. We were building. I mean, the 4th Marine Division, 4th Marine Air Wing was there. We built a squadron operations facility on the Naval Air Station. We do airfield repairs, runway repairs, base improvement projects, housing, barracks, medical. I mean, we built a food service for the club. I mean, things like that. It was very, very diverse and widespread. I mean, I learned a lot, and I got to see a lot of different things.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, those sound like some great projects, if you ask
Yeah,
me. So
and
sounds like a good experience.
security facilities.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there was a lot to it.
Awesome. So does the New Orleans period end your active duty?
I left active duty in New Orleans, and then and that was 1998, and got home in July, and I had my first reserve affiliation in September.
And this is now based in Newton or the Boston area?
I came in through Quincy, Massachusetts, but my first assignment was in Brunswick, Maine. There was a naval construction battalion in Brunswick, Maine, and I would go there for over the next 10 years. About 6 or 8 of those years were in Brunswick, Maine, and then the others were in Newport, Rhode Island.
Got it. Yeah, pretty convenient in terms of geographical location for you.
Yeah, it was a 2.5-3 hour ride,
Yeah.
and but it was a busy time. I mean, I had 3 young children at the time, and it was. I sometimes look at some of how much we got accomplished and how much work we did and squeezed it all in. I think what I did through that period of time was I think I built a lot of capacity. I don't think I had a lot of balance, but I think I built a lot of capacity. Yeah.
Right. Before jumping to that, I wanted to check in because we just kind of shifted periods from finishing active duty in New Orleans, getting back to Massachusetts. And do you remember anything in that kind of time frame where you were shifting, whether it was psyche, whether it was just your day to day from, being in service to now being a civilian?
Well, I mean, there's a certain amount of excitement too. I mean, I was now reacquainting myself with a lot of my friends who had been in the business world for 4 or 5 years, and that was back at a time when even in construction, you'd go to work every day with a suit and tie. Not so much anymore, but there was a seriousness about that for me too, about the fact that I was 28 years old now, and I got to kind of get my big boy pants on and go to work and start my career. And it was funny because I was kind of put in with people that had been doing this project or this job or this role for several years, and they didn't know how to take me at first, and so but they were all watching, and I really had to prove myself, and I did, and thankfully I did soon enough, because 2 years after I joined the company that I joined, we went into a huge recession with the banking crisis of 1990, and I was one of 5 project managers in a company that I joined. And I was the newest one, but when the dust settled, I was the only one left, and so I earned my stripes, and it was it was a time when it was what they call hammer time. You got to get it done. So I was just glad that I was able to do that and differentiate myself.
Sure. It's really interesting to hear you say what I hear from a lot of veterans in terms of, switching obviously from military to civilian and then needing to prove yourself in the civilian sector. So it's interesting hearing you say that, given your experience actually happened to have been, very, very relatable. I mean, almost like one-to-one resume type of thing. Nonetheless, needing to kind of prove yourself in that space for that company, which you obviously ended up doing.
Yeah, but I think that happens too
Mhm.
when you're a civilian and you move to a new job, you know,
Right.
from job to job. I think people want to see
Yeah.
what you've got, and they
Agreed.
don't,
Agreed.
and nobody takes anything for granted or just gives it to you. You got to earn it.
Right. Agreed. And I think that's also somewhat important to highlight. Uh, just recognizing that fact, whether it's coming from military to civilian or switching from a civilian role to another civilian role, you're going to need to prove yourself and therefore kind of set your expectations accordingly. Speaking to, vets who are coming into the civilian sector, it's good to
Right.
have that kind of mental understanding. So sounds like you're one of one project manager at this company. Um, how much longer until you started that first rotation of reserve duty?
Well, I remember when I was one of one. I mean, I'd been at the company for 2 years, and one of the reasons why I was one of one is because we were awarded a major project that I brought in,
Hmm.
and so I was managing it. It was really at that point in time the only project the company was doing. Um, it was an important project in the city of Boston. It was the restoration of Faneuil Hall and the old State House, two very important historical buildings. Um,
Amazing.
and that was about that time. I just got married. It was about that time that we um, were going to Operation Desert Storm, Desert Shield,
Hmm.
Desert Storm, and I remember getting a mobilization order back then for our battalion. And if you know the history of that, I mean, the build up to from Desert Shield to Desert Storm took several months. Um, Desert Storm lasted 3 or 4 days. And so my mobilization order came to me via telegram. Now think about that for a second, right? I mean, again, no, there wasn't email back then. Via telegram to the officers and men of NMCB 27, and it was a mobilization order that had us going in 60 days to start training to deploy, and that was sobering for me because I had a child on the way,
Hmm.
and I had a career now, and I had to contemplate, what happens at this stage. There was a lot to do about nothing because 3 days later the war was over, and we didn't mobilize, but we did do some desert training anyway, just because it was all lined up. But that got me thinking about, again, the seriousness of this commitment,
Hmm.
and I truly do believe that Winston Churchill quote, twice a citizen, for the role of a reservist, and uh, and again, as I mentioned before, uh, the naval construction forces are so integrated, and that really started for me uh, a time that where the whole naval construction forces went through a recapitalization
Hmm.
because they were so important during Desert Storm. And that recapitalization really prepared them for when OEF happened, post 9/11, to play a big role in the Middle East.
So when you received this telegram for the workup of potential deployment, um, did you have to go to, what is it, Maine or New Hampshire?
No, I mean, we were, it was a notification, and it was giving us a timeline, to get our affairs in order because we
Hmm.
were going to be mobilized in 60 days. So we started to do that, and but then they rescinded that 4 weeks later after
Okay.
after they were retrograding from the desert.
I see. Yeah. Okay. So then I guess when is, from that point, when is the next call up for reserve duty?
Well, I mean, so again, it's a monthly monthly meeting, a monthly drill. And so we'd go to drill, and our order of the day was always training for readiness, and we had implementing the fiscal year training plan, and working on unit integrity, and that's what we did. And so we went back into our normal tempo, but it was different after Desert Storm because we realized that it wasn't summer camp, right? This is something where there was more of an imperative for readiness, because you wanted to make sure that the next time you got that call, you were at the top of your game.
Right. So, before we move kind of like further away, too far away from, active service and then, career and reserve duty career, as a hindsight kind of advice to your younger self or to other veterans transitioning from military to civilian life and civilian profession, any advice that you'd give to those listening?
Well, one is get over yourself. There's some really smart people in the civilian sector too, and some really great programs. And while you have a skill set that some people might not have, they have some skill sets you might not have. So there's I love Stephen Covey. Seek to understand and then be understood. It's I think that people need to listen, observe, and understand their environment. And they teach that principle, in the whole OODA loop principle in the military, about observing and then deciding, and after you orient yourself. The surroundings are a little bit different. The expectations might be a little bit different. It's a little more relaxed. I mean, I remember coming home from the Middle East after being deployed, and was struck by how everybody was relaxed in the conference room. And I was used to walking into a conference room and having everybody say attention on deck.
Right.
That wasn't going to happen. That wasn't going to happen anymore. But it's pretty, for me, it was easy to adjust, and understand.
Yeah, it's good advice. It's a great quote. I hadn't heard that before. I'm definitely gonna remember that, write that down. So yeah, thank you for sharing. Okay, cool. So, where I kind of paused and asked for that kind of hindsight advice, it sounded like you were, doing rotations. This is after Desert Storm. You're doing your regular rotations in reserve duty. I think we got to the kind of time frame of when you start Commodore. Is that correct?
Not quite, because I had changed civilian careers twice.
Okay.
And I think the next big turning point for me in the military really was September 11th. And by that time I had really changed and been promoted from junior officer to mid-grade lieutenant commander, and then senior officer commander. And when I were at war, and I was in an important position in the scheme of the Naval Construction Forces, as we were sending people forward, people that we had trained, people that we wanted to make sure were in the position to deliver on the mission, and to be safe, and to come home. So that was a really busy time in my life, and that was the time when I realized that I didn't really want to work for somebody else. It was there was a little bit of stress between me and the company I was working for at the time about, all the time I was spending, right, doing that. And I was 39 years old, about to turn 40. And I said, geez, I think at this stage in my career, I'm ready to make a change. But I think my window of starting my own company is closing pretty rapidly. My children were 7, 9, and 11 at the time. And I had to think about, starting a business, taking the risk, but still having the resources to get them to college, and so I felt like I had the runway to do that. And and to build a company that could also support the lifestyle that I had chosen, to be committed to this, to the Naval Construction Forces as well.
Yeah. Wow. So starting your company, did that happen before 9/11?
It happened before 9/11. No, it didn't.
Okay.
It happened after. It
So then,
happened. Yeah, it happened in. Yeah, it happened about 8 months after.
okay. So then, just to kind of understand time frame there. So going back to the 9/11, do you remember where you were at and kind of what your headspace was as it relates to, especially as you mentioned, right? You were just upgraded in terms of your command. What were your thoughts in that moment?
Yeah, I mean,
In
I'll
those,
tell you what. During 9/11, I was a board member for about 24 years for the New England Center and Home for Veterans, and I was at the New England Center and Home for Veterans during 9/11, and they had
wow.
televisions all over the place, and that was a pretty profound place to be on that day. And yeah, people didn't really know what the heck was going on and how to
Mm-hmm.
internalize it. And then I remember going back, and there was a woman that was working for me, and she was a marketing salesperson, and she was um, from Queens, New York, and had a pretty heavy New York accent, and a lot of family and friends in New York, and she was having a hard time. So I kept her in the office, and I tried to get her to focus with me on business, on sales, which I just kind of don't. And it was really for me almost trying to get her, to work through what you needed to work through, but also to kind of, I don't know, survive the day.
Yeah.
It was a weird thing for me, and I wonder today why I did that. But we ended up, yeah, just hanging out and late,
Mm-hmm.
after work and going through tactics and stuff for her job.
Yeah.
I don't know whether that's a diversion or a distraction or what, but it was therapeutic for both of us. Yeah.
Yep. Yep. Sounds like it. Yeah. So in that moment, like when do you get called for reserve duty? What happens in terms of, your service and in that time frame?
Well, 2 weeks after September 11th, um, no, yeah, a week and a half after September 11th, I reported aboard, into Newport, Rhode Island, to become the operations officer of the 7th Naval Construction Regiment. And that's where, I was read into a lot of the classified um, taskings, for the Naval Construction Forces, which really drove our mission. What
Mm-hmm.
do we need to do now, and how do we need to do it? And so, again, it was important, and gave me a pretty good sense of purpose at that point in time.
Sure. What
Um,
was, if you remember, kind of like broadly, presuming you can say so at this point, what was like kind of the broad mission set that you were angling toward?
well, at that point in time, they were still think about what they were responding, and they wanted to and they mounted out troops immediately, to Afghanistan. Hadn't gone into Iraq yet, but the question there is, I mean, the Naval Construction Forces have a strong tie to the Marine Corps and the Marine Corps mission.
Mm-hmm.
We're not really shipboard sailors, right? And a lot of what we do with the expeditionary forces in the Marine Corps.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really, where are we going? What do we need to do? Some of what we were doing at first was to back up some of the active battalions that were already forward deployed, places like Rota, Spain, or Okinawa that were going, or Roosevelt Roads, Puerto Rico, where that battalion, boom, had to move forward right away. That's why they were forward, and then we had to go back there and get into their place so that we could be the next ones to move forward. And so it was a lot of it too at that point in time was me learning. I was a young senior officer, a pretty new commander, and I was operating at a different level than I had been operating as a lieutenant or a lieutenant commander, where my real aperture was more focused on the unit I was with and not, how we fit into the bigger picture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how long until you deployed to the Middle East?
That was 2000, 2001 when of course September 11th. I didn't get to the Middle East myself until 2007.
Okay.
I had different. I went from 7th Naval Construction Regiment operations officer to commanding officer of NMCB 21 in Lakehurst, New Jersey. We thought we were going to be mobilized as a battalion, and then some things changed. And instead of mobilizing our whole battalion, we mobilized a couple of our heavy air detachments. So I left there after 2 years, and my role there was getting them ready and getting the battalion ready for the call. I left there and went down to our 1st Naval Construction Division. I was promoted to captain. And 1 year into our 1st Naval Construction Division, I was tasked to 22nd Naval Construction Regiment Forward to go to the Middle East and fill that role, and to take on the role as commander of the task group for the expeditionary forces, working for U.S. NAVCENT. So we had 2,200 Seabees throughout the theater at that point in time, and a number of missions. I felt a little bit like my civilian experience was really helpful there, because I broke it down to, okay, we're doing this with the Marine Corps, we're doing this with the Army, we're doing this for special operations, we're doing, and these are my clients. These are my clients, the commanding generals and the commanding, the commanders of the missions that we had that we were serving. They were my clients, and I wanted to make sure that we understood our mission and what success meant and how to implement it.
So during this time, so I mean that's the more you kind of describe what was going on and kind of your growth in your military career, at the same time you're also taking the leap of starting your business while also having kids, like you mentioned right a few moments ago. How did that? I mean, what was your kind of like thought process, or I'll call it energy, toward starting the business at that point, given all of what was happening?
Well, my energy was very high because I knew that it was imperative for me to build a stable company that I could leave. So I built Commodore builders in a very unconventional way. When we ordinarily build a construction company, you build it one job at a time. I invested a lot of money in the first year and took a big risk on hiring some very senior people that at a loss in our first year to build a capability that I knew we could fund in the second year. So we did $7 million worth of work our first year, which didn't pay the bills, but we did $28 million worth of work our second year, which more than paid for the bills. And I left the company after our fourth year. And by that time, we were doing $70 million worth of work. So we grew quickly, and we were a company that had an infrastructure and stability and leadership, so that I could leave them, and they could go on without me, and that really challenged our leadership too. I mean, and challenged me. The bigger challenge for me was coming back. Because I had left them, they were doing well in so many things now, and it was a challenge, but an opportunity. I had the opportunity now to recreate my role. Where do they need me, and where can I really add value, and how do I allow the people that have stepped up and moved into really, more senior important positions to stay there and to continue to grow too, without me coming back and just squashing them down.
That's an amazing evolution from that. In that first kind of stage, that first year, what do you think, like, characteristics or circumstances, as sort of again, hindsight advice kind of a question, what allowed you to, first of all, create that $7 million in business, right? I mean, that's not nothing.
Well, I mean, I wasn't. I'd been in the business in Boston by that time for 15, 18 years. I had relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the senior people that I brought in had relationships too. So, I was while I was starting from scratch. I had a personal reputation, and that, and I had some friends in the industry that were willing to help. And then by happenstance, I was on a Navy weekend, and there was a reserve admiral who actually he found out I was in construction in Boston. He was a senior executive for a company that was owned by Goldman Sachs that was doing a $5 million project in Boston. And he said, "Hey, I got a project. You want it?" So again, it was very lucky. And I think another, example, I think, of why my Navy experience and commitment to the construction forces and the relationships that I've earned, and nurtured through there have really helped me with a really great network of good people that are willing to extend themselves, for one another.
That's an amazing story and set of circumstances, right? To be in your reserve duty and come across this person to get you one of your first jobs as a new company. That's awesome. So I guess we'll shift back to the reserve duty element of your career. And, as you're switching these positions, you're in New Jersey, command in there. Is the next step from New Jersey deployment to the Middle East, or was there an in between?
I relinquished my command in New Jersey in September of 2005, reported to the 1st Naval Construction Division, and I got my mobilization order from them late in 2006. So I was there for a little more than a year. Not quite a year. Yeah, for about a year, and I got that mobilization order, and it was February 2007 that I left my company.
So walk us through kind of that phase.
Well, that was a little surreal. Again, Boston, Massachusetts is not the heartland of America. And when you mobilize like I did, it's different than when you're mobilizing with an active duty construction regiment. An active duty construction regiment mobilizes from Gulfport, Mississippi, or Port Hueneme, California, and they leave behind family and friends in Gulfport, Mississippi, or Port Hueneme, California, that form a community and take care of one another, right? And so there's that whole community village, that really looks after one another while you're gone, and that's different in when you don't have your unit around you, right? I was lucky. I mean, I've got such a strong network of people, and my children, I put them in private school at the time because I wanted them to be more nurtured, and they were. I mean, and so they had a lot of people watching out for them. But the people that were watching out for them and were taking care of them and giving them the support weren't experiencing the same thing as them, right? So the Gulfport or Port Hueneme folks, they're all kind of experiencing the same thing together and understanding each other in the context of what they're doing, which is different than what my family went through. Although I think their experience was very good, and through that, I think my children developed a pretty strong sense of service, and understanding of why I was doing what I was doing.
Yeah, I totally can understand what you're saying, and there's certainly a difference in community when everyone around you has a significant other or partner or whatever, family member, deployed in service versus being in a city where everyone's just in their own worlds. So that's very understandable. So you deploy. Walk us through kind of what's going on in the Middle East, what your mission set is, what you're doing.
So when I deployed to the Middle East, I was we had a rare area in Kuwait that provided entry for all the naval construction forces into the theater. And so I reported there, and part of my responsibility was managing that and all of the equipment that was coming in, all of the deployment of all of the things forward. But then, as I told you, I had I had a second mission, and that was with U.S. Navy Central Command and Task Group 57, Task Group 57.2, or I'm sorry, 56.2, which was part of Task Force 56, which was the expeditionary forces for U.S. Navy Central Command, and that included the EOD, the SEALs, the supply, a lot of things, and so my job to U.S. NavCent was to oversee that in the theater. And the theater extended from Iraq to Afghanistan to the Horn of Africa to Bahrain, and so in Kuwait. And so throughout all those areas, we had missions that ranged from combat outposts and forward operating bases for the Marine Corps to safe houses and airfields and helicopter pads for the special operations people, to hearts and minds missions in Djibouti and Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and Kenya for schools, for water well drilling and school improvements. So very, very diverse set of kinds of projects. But in every case, there were clients, right? And so I would always check in with the commanding generals and colonels and captains on what was going on, what they needed, what our people were doing. The battalions had their own leadership as well, and I was providing support to them. And then getting missions of our own. I mean, we had an amphibious construction battalion tasked to us to go to Al Qut, Iraq, and build tantamount to toll booths, security roadblocks, so that they can inspect every vehicle going east or west from Iran into Baghdad. For weapons and whatever. So I mean, so it was enabling things for them. I mean, this amphibious construction battalion comes in and they need to be enabled, and so how do you pull things out of their way, obstacles, make sure they get their materials, and give them the support they need for their people.
That's an extremely diverse project set in many different countries, many different areas. That's pretty amazing. And I think you had mentioned earlier that while you're doing this, I mean, thankfully now, right, we had computers and whatnot. You were also communicating and at least checking in with your company in the States, correct?
I was checking in, but I was not managing it.
Right.
I really did relinquish that. I did not have the capacity to do what I needed to do for the military and try to run a company, and I knew that. I knew better than that.
Yeah. Well, it's good that you recognize that. What you were already doing in service sounded like a lot for one person.
Well, it wasn't just one person. We had a lot of people over there, and
Sure.
And a lot of people did a lot of great things.
Awesome. So I know we're coming close on time, so I want to check in. If we got to cut it, we could cut it and continue at a different date that works for you. All right, Joe, we are here with part 2 of your story. For our listeners, it might be a little bit less obvious. For our viewers on YouTube, maybe a little bit more obvious. We cut our episode in 2 parts. So if you notice any difference, that would be the reason. Joe, we last left off in the time period of your deployment to the Middle East. You had handed off the keys to your company, to your team, obviously not been able to manage both military responsibilities and civilian profession responsibilities. So kind of take us back through that process. You deploy to the Middle East. What happens next?
Well, and back up for 1 second.
Sure.
One thing is, how did I build the company to start with? When I founded Commodore Builders, I was a commander in the Naval Construction Forces, and I had an important job at the time. I was the operations officer of the 7th Naval Construction Regiment, and we were very busy deploying troops, and I was getting ready to take command of a battalion. And I knew at that point in 2002, when I founded Commodore, that there'd be a time in the next 3 to 5 years that I would be deploying and leaving my family and leaving my company. So I built Commodore from the start to endure that, and I hired very senior. I hired senior people, and actually took a $700,000 loss in the first year to pay for that. I mean, I paid for capability because I wanted to build it quickly so that I could have the infrastructure and leadership that could run the company in the short term while I was gone. A typical construction startup would not do it that way. But we, so we did 7 million our first year, 28 million our second year, 50 million our third year. And so we were a viable company by the time I left. And I did leave and went to the Middle East, and I had a senior leadership team of 4 people at that time, 5 including me, and they took charge. And literally, my engagement for the time I was away in the Middle East was minimal. I mean, I would stay in touch. But I didn't call in for meetings. I got involved if there were any issues like a termination or something like that, but at a high level. But I was not, again, calling in for meetings or dealing with the stresses of running a business while I was in the Middle East, and so I valued and appreciated that, and frankly was proud of the fact that in the 4 years, because I went away in year 5, in 4 years I was able to build that level of sustainability within our business.
Absolutely. I'm curious if you could expand on that decision, whether it was kind of what your mindset was like, or how you, had the guts to take that initial loss for the overarching kind of vision and goal. I mean, that's not an easy thing to do.
Well, first of all, I didn't expect it would be that much. But it's hard to start a business. We did $1 million worth of work in our first 6 months and $6 million in our next 6 months. But we made money in the second year at 28 million, but we just didn't have the volume to support the overhead that we had. But I felt like I was buying a business. So that was really, for me, the sunk cost of buying a business, because we bought a business. We put the people in place, and it was still. I mean, we were all working, all hands on deck. It's not like as president of the company, it was a hierarchical business. Everybody was doing everything, but we had capability and capacity very, very quickly. That was beyond the volume, and that there was a price tag to that. But that kept us safe and allowed us to grow very quickly. In fact, when I was away in the Middle East, Inc. magazine recognized Commodore Builders as one of the fastest growing companies in the Inc. 500 list, on the Inc. 500. I think we were 120 or something like that. And I got a little recognition for that, for having been away, and receiving that while I was in the Middle East. And my senior team went to Chicago to accept the award, and they had a photograph of them taken, and they photoshopped me into it, which was awfully nice. Yeah,
that's awesome. You were, I guess, notified like relatively immediately. Like, did you know right away?
I did. Yeah, I did.
Awesome.
The magazine came out, and we were on it, and so it was a fun time. And then when I got back from the Middle East, Inc. magazine wrote an article about me and about Commodore, and then the title of the article was "Absence Makes the Team Grow Stronger," and it was, I was proud of that. I mean, I think that because leaving the company and leaving it in their hands, I mean, I set the direction. We had, we had a good culture, and I trusted them, and three out of those, um, 3 out of the 5, me included, still remain in the company today. Um, and um, again, I was proud of that. But what was interesting was I was away, and then I had the opportunity, and I've had that opportunity twice in my life, when I was in the Middle East, and when I took a leave of absence for another disaster recovery mission that we can talk about later. But both times, as I was re-entering the business, I had the luxury of assessing roles, responsibilities, and where would I plug in best, to allow the maturity and growth of the people in the business and the positions, and come in and not be in the way, but come in a way that would be right for me and right for the business.
Yeah, that's a really unique position to be in twice,
Right.
nonetheless. Pretty amazing. So, kind of moving forward, we kind of touched on a little bit what your general mission set was and what you were managing in your deployment. I guess let's kind of carry on with that process. Anything that comes to mind, generally speaking, in that deployment, that you could remember that you want to talk about.
Well, it wasn't unlike my business. I mean, the Naval Construction Forces, we had reporting commanders, throughout the theater, and we had projects, missions, and we had clients to manage, our reporting commanders, and so there was logistics involved, there was execution involved, there were organizational challenges, and so I spent a lot of time, really making sure that our people got the support they needed and had the tools and equipment and materials and leadership that they needed. That's interesting. I mean, there were a number of people in the theater and different command relationships. Some I had OpCon over, operational control. Many I had just AdCon, administrative control, because they were chopped to other reporting commanders. And there were some that I was just supporting from the rear, saying, okay, what heavy equipment do you need? What armored equipment do you need? How do you, so there were a variety of different roles. And when I went forward, and I did, it was probably, and during my time there, I spent probably 180 days, traveling through Iraq and Afghanistan, and meeting with commanders and troops, and just making sure that they were getting what they needed, and that we were delivering on our missions. And we had, of course, reporting structures and meetings to track, what was happening. So, I mean, again, it wasn't a lot unlike running my business, except for the complexities of multiple commanders and command relationships
and countries.
well, countries, and the hazards of the conflict, right?
Yeah, but I hear you in terms of certainly the similar principles.
Mm-hmm.
Where was a lot of the logistics coming from, like in a literal sense? I mean, from the U.S. initially, or was it from a different base in Europe or something? How was that process?
So we ran in Kuwait, Camp Morel. Camp Morel was the rear platform for the Naval Construction Forces. They all entered through it, exited through it, and were supported by it. And so we had a major logistical yard there. And when the MRAPs came through to replace the armored Humvees, they all came through there. We got them, we deployed them. when there were materials and again, the battalions and regiments that were coming and going were all coming through and being indoctrinated there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. Interesting. So, as this deployment is kind of coming to a close, coming to an end, what was that process like for you? I mean, I guess first of all, did the time frame was the time frame accurate from initially deploying?
It was. It
Mm-hmm.
was. I remember in October of 2007, my relief had come, and I took him on a couple trips to see some of our reporting commanders, and then we went out through the Horn of Africa where we had some things going on, and he went back into the Middle East, and I came home, and I came home through Gulfport, Mississippi, where I reported to the 22nd Naval Construction Regiment, and it was really an odd time. I mean, it was it took me a while, longer than I thought, to really get back into the swing in the company.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I came back in a different role, just the tempo, the pace, of being in the Middle East was different, and the formality, as a Navy captain, when I walked into a room, I got an attention on deck. I didn't get that when I got back to my conference room in my office, which is funny. And I mean, it just took me a little while to get to decompress,
Yeah.
And to get back into the swing of feeling like I was, really engaged and active in my business.
Mm-hmm. So to kind of expand on that a little bit more, and this is really kind of a core element of the show, which is to talk about that transition process, that decompressing and getting back into the swing of things. In hindsight, what kind of advice would you give yourself, in that time frame?
Be patient. Be patient. I mean, the mission's different. When you're forward and you're and you're dealing in an important mission or organization, for a deployed military unit. I mean, this a pretty clear sense of purpose,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you feel like you're doing important things, and you're empowered by that. When you get back to your office, it's a little bit different, and
Mm-hmm.
but we find purpose in our business in different things. I mean, the things we build. We're building a $400 million veterans facility in the Holyoke Veterans Home in Holyoke, Massachusetts. I mean, building a project like that has an awesome sense of purpose, right?
Sure.
As does building a police station or a fire station or school. So you find purpose in different ways, but the adrenaline is different when
Mm-hmm.
when you're in uniform and in that environment and at that pace.
Yeah. Did you have a kind of period before you literally got back home? You mentioned, getting back to Mississippi as the, U.S. stateside base. Was there like a decompression time frame that they kind of required from you, or you just kind of went home right away?
No, I mean, it really wasn't for me. I mean, I was an individual. I didn't come back with my unit. I came back and was replaced, by another captain. So I came back alone and reported back to my unit. It was fine. There was just the out processing, the physical and all that stuff. It took a few days,
Mm-hmm.
and I was anxious, to not stick in Mississippi, but to get back to Boston to see my family.
Right. Yeah. Interesting.
And get back to my company, right?
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot going on for you on all fronts. So you get back to your company, kind of what happens next?
Well, they were all, very happy to see me and celebratory about and supportive. And then it was really, we actually had a conference call or two while I was still in the Middle East to talk about kind of my reentry, just to talk about what people were doing and what what they thought that I should focus on, what was going well, where they needed my help, and we talked about my focus being developing people, developing clients, and working on succession, across the company. Excuse me, which was those were three good things to work on. Now, but keep in mind that was 2007. 2 years later, we were in the middle of the Great Recession, and that drove a whole realignment of priorities. And we went right back into being very operational, and all hands on deck to get through the recession.
Yeah, so we could jump right into that. I'm really curious to hear kind of again, obviously now that you have hindsight knowledge, what was your strategy going in as recession happened? What worked well, what didn't work well? What would you
Well,
what advice would you give?
My military training and my and my perspective from the military really helped me as a leader lead my company through the recession. First of all, leading with purpose and articulating, commander's intent, purpose, method, and end state with clarity. I remember, how important it was for us to communicate regularly. I mean, it was a very uncertain time, and we went from 130 employees down to 67 employees. That was tough. And so when you do that, you create a sense of angst in the organization. And but I had to be very, very clear on a weekly basis, how we were doing financially, what was going on, what our goals were and why, and whether we were hitting them or not, and what we needed to do. But more importantly, and I think that I attribute this to the military, is I was able to keep the long view, and stay loyal to the things that were important to us, even though we were threatened by the recession. And I think that in hindsight, it was really critical for us at that point in time, and it was informed for me by being an officer in the military and with a worldwide view and aperture and understanding of bigger picture things. And so while we knew that we had to go into the weeds sometimes, I was still able to keep a big picture view, and see beyond the skirmish of the recession, to a future steady state.
I was gonna ask. I think you maybe just answered it. Probably just answered it. I was gonna ask, like, in terms of morale, you kind of mentioned it for your teams, and having those weekly updates and really trying to be as transparent as possible. Then I was gonna ask for yourself, how you pull through that period of time in terms of morale. I think you might have just answered it, but I want to make sure I'm not presuming anything.
It was hard. I mean, it was really hard because for 2 years, 2009 and 2010, we worked really, really hard for 365 days, and at the end of the year, we had really minimal to show for it. We didn't make much money. We were just trying to survive, and it was a very, very competitive and very, very tough time, particularly because we were a young company. We didn't have major projects and throughput. So, and I remember looking in the mirror saying, "Holy cow, that was a really long year," and feeling demotivated because we
Yeah.
didn't have much to show for it. But still keeping the resolve, and the optimism, that hey, we survived. I mean, there were other people that didn't,
Yeah.
and bonuses. We didn't have bonuses. We couldn't afford them, but
Mhm.
we had a great team, and 2 or 3 years later, we were really firing on all cylinders, and experiencing double-digit growth. So I think it was because we had the courage, to stick it out. We learned, that we developed what we called a footprint strategy. I said, well, we're not making the kind of margins, but let's grow our footprint
Mm.
in different markets, even though it's risky and it's almost pay to play here because you're not making much for it. But then when the recession, we get out of the recession, and there's economic growth that we'll experience, it'll be exponential for us because our footprint's bigger, and that's exactly what happened.
Mm. Wow, really interesting. Was there a specific project or few projects in a short time frame that happened and allowed you to realize, oh, we're out, we're finally out?
Yeah, we started to get some larger work. Back then, a $4 or $5 million job was a really good job, and all of a sudden, I looked and we had a couple of $10, $12 million projects. Today we're doing $400 million projects. But it's funny. It didn't. It's like you don't really recognize it happening until all of a sudden you say, "Wait a second, we're out of it."
Right.
Right, and that's how it kind of happened. But again, I think that I had patience that I probably wouldn't have had I not experienced what I experienced in the military.
Amazing. Yeah. And I mean, that was a really interesting strategy here, that the footprint one. So yeah, thank you for kind of expanding on that. So when is that next, we skipped ahead a little bit. I'm not sure when your next deployment occurred. You had mentioned disaster relief.
Oh, so that was actually after I retired. It wasn't military, but it might as well have been. In 2018, in the Merrimack Valley of Massachusetts, one city and two towns, the city of Lawrence, Massachusetts, and the towns of Andover and North Andover, experienced gas explosions in their gas grid, and which shut down gas service to all those municipalities in the month of September, and
Wow.
and damaged some 10,000 homes and businesses, where we had to replace 50 miles of gas pipeline in the street and replace boilers and hot water heaters and gas stoves and gas dryers in some 10,000 dwellings. And the governor appointed me at that point to be the chief recovery officer. And I ended up calling 2 retired Navy admirals and 4 Navy captains that I had trained with, deployed with, and they came and worked with me, and we built a 5,000 person team and put about $750 million worth of work in place over a 12-week period to get everybody back in their homes before Christmas.
Wow.
And yeah,
that sounds like a really unique, I don't know, circumstance that, I don't know, I feel like I have not heard that before. Are you familiar with any comparables in any disaster recovery in different states?
Well, in the Naval Construction Forces, no, now I am. I mean, I learned a lot.
No, you are.
I mean, the governor called me because he knew of my military background, and I had known him, and others that recommended me as a candidate knew of my background with the Naval Construction Forces. But in the Seabees, in the Naval Construction Forces, we train for disaster recovery, humanitarian relief, contingency engineering, and those are some of the operations other than war that we routinely train for. with the same kind of construct and structure as we would deploy to a war. But and frankly, the Merrimack Valley disaster included humanitarian relief, contingency engineering, and disaster recovery. So we were able to employ many of the principles and structures that we learned in the Naval Construction Force and Marine Corps planning process that we studied and were trained for. And so and that was and the success of that mission was entirely due to the training that we received and our ability to get organized around that.
Yeah, that's fascinating, and it's amazing to hear. I mean, for example, what recently happened in North Carolina, did they stand up any like a similar type of a situation? If you know.
So yeah, I mean, the FEMA and the state-run disaster recovery or emergency management organizations all have similar types of training and capability. What I learned during and after, because I actually looked at maybe putting my business into a disaster recovery capability and chasing some of that work for the future, I learned that there's a whole industry of ready, shelf ready, disaster recovery type solutions, from water to dwellings to encampments to you name it, to hazmat. I mean, all those things. So this was a little bit different, and frankly, I wished when I was in the Merrimack Valley that I had the knowledge of all those off the shelf solutions, because it would have been nice to know. But I think, again, just the alignment of the staff that I pulled together, the leaders I pulled together, and our ability to have a common language and to employ the principles really quickly allowed us to organize and to deliver on a solution.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that in particular was what I'm, fascinated in and intrigued by, is standing up that kind of military expertise, veterans that are in the area, in the business of construction built environment, and allowing them, for example, and the story you just gave us, supporting the disaster relief. So what was, you had mentioned this been your second time stepping away from business. What was that like for you?
Well, it's interesting. I mentioned to you when I was in the Middle East that I would, probably weekly put a call in to the company just to check in. But again, it was never any, operational engagement or I wasn't calling in for meetings or Zoom. We didn't have Zoom back then, but then I went to the Merrimack Valley, and I remember I got the call on September 17th. In the afternoon, and I went to Lawrence, and I didn't get back to my business until, and this is like leaving my business without warning. I mean, when I left the business for the Middle East, I knew it was coming, and I planned for it, and I prepared for it, and I put things in place. But this time I left without any notice, and I left for 12 weeks. I didn't get back to my office until December 20th, and never came to my office once in between. And our COO, who ran the business while I was in the Middle East and ran the business while I was in the Merrimack Valley, he said, "Geez, Joe, I think I spoke with you more when you were in the Middle East than I did when you're in the Merrimack Valley," which is true, because the tempo there was 90 hours a week. I mean, we were it was no joke. Not that the Middle East was a joke, but the Middle East, we had more structure. We had more, we just didn't have it. And so we were working 7 days a week without a break. I mean, when I was in the Middle East, I got to go to the gym every day. And I didn't get to go to the gym once when I was in the Merrimack Valley. But again, similar to when I went to the Middle East, I had this unbelievable sense of pride that I was able to unplug, and the company thrived, in my absence, which to me is just a testament to setting the right direction and hiring and motivating the right people and keeping a great culture.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really amazing. I mean, as you were describing that, it was becoming obvious to me that you had a lot more structure and stability in the Middle East with, the different military infrastructure that existed there and teams, et cetera, versus disaster relief that you had to immediately stand up. So it definitely
Well,
makes sense. Yeah.
well, it's funny. We called it in the Merrimack Valley. We called it building the fire engine on the way to the fire. Um, and it really and I said and I described it. I said, if we called the Naval Construction Forces in to manage the Merrimack Valley, they would be in within 48 hours. They'd start coming in, and they would come in airplanes with all the gear, all the equipment, and and we could get a couple regiments in there, so 3,000 or 4,000 people, Seabees, but they'd have a structure, and every individual would know what their job was, and every individual would know their chain of command. And when you said something at the top, it would get all the way down to the bottom. But we had these 5,000 people without that structure. And the hardest part was trying to define and organize small unit leadership.
Right.
In small unit leadership, in a military vernacular, is a key building block principle of efficiency in the military. And but to build that from scratch in a contingency environment like the Merrimack Valley was really hard. And that's why everybody there worked so hard, because you didn't have the structure.
Right. You're touching on something that I've been really curious about, and I was kind of asking that as just bringing up North Carolina again, because that's just a recent event. I mean, would it not be beneficial to bring in, Seabees, bring in whoever else relevant for military to support those kind of disaster efforts?
They do. I mean, Katrina had a had a JFMIC, a command operations center operated by the military. National Guards often deployed for these kinds of things, and they have a structure. We actually did deploy some National Guard units in the Merrimack Valley to help with some of the humanitarian support. But so you have that. But the capability, and there's a lot of civilian capability in those kinds of things, that can really, really come to bear. It's just the Merrimack Valley was a very specific thing because it was about gas deployment, and we needed plumbers. We had 1,250 plumbers.
Wow.
And when you think about that, we didn't have enough available in Massachusetts that we could get. So we flew them in from all over the country, and actually put them. We had a cruise liner that we commissioned in Boston Harbor for them to stay. They all slept on a cruise ship.
Wow, that's crazy. That's a good idea. Wow, awesome. So what was finishing that project like, and then again reintegrating to your business?
Well, it's funny, because it was exactly the same. I had the opportunity. Now, I wasn't gone for as long, but I had the opportunity again to say, okay, well, how do I plug in? But I was exhausted too. I mean, when you go for 90 hours, a week, I mean, with very little sleep for an extended period of time, you kind of crash at the end. And, I remember I left, we had the holidays, and, it was, again, it took me probably 3 or 4 months to get really back into the swing and to feel, because again, talk about a sense of purpose. Getting 10,000 people home before the holidays was a pretty amazing sense of purpose and clear. a little clarity and purpose there, right?
Definitely, yeah. Wow, that's amazing. So I'll ask this as a question. Potentially, it's going to be taking a little step back. When did you retire from military service?
So I retired. My change of command and retirement ceremony was in September of 2009. And my actual retirement was about 4 months later. It was February 2010. But I really stopped working in September of 2009.
So going back to that period real quick, and to kind of just hash out or expand on, one, just what that was like for you, what those feelings were after such an amazing and long career in the military.
Well, I got to tell you, one of the things about being in the military, and at the time I was a senior officer in the Naval Construction Forces. The Naval Construction Forces is, and I might have mentioned this before, is highly integrated between the active and reserve. The reserve forces comprise about 2/3 of the capability. And so they're a very important part of it, particularly during time of war or conflict, because they scale up using the reserve capability.
Mm-hmm.
And so as a reserve officer, I was on the board of directors for the Naval Construction Forces. And so quarterly, I would go either to California or to Little Creek, Virginia, or to Gulfport, Mississippi, and I would meet for 2 or 3 days with some really smart senior naval officers, Marine Corps officers, and civilians, talking about policy and talking about capability and demand and missions and just really big things that actually informed a lot. I mean, when I come home from those, I had so many great ideas for my business that were informed by just things I heard and things that were happening there. And I was able to add a lot of value there too, because there were some things in the civilian sector that I think that were really, really relevant and applicable. And so when I left that, I had a real feeling of emptiness. I got back to work, and my world, which had been huge, just I felt like it was right here, very small. And because now, as opposed to focusing on my 2,200 person regiment with missions in Iraq and Afghanistan and training for the Korean War conflict and the global war on terrorism and operations other than the war and all the things that we were doing. And now I was focused on 140 people in the construction business, that had a footprint of greater Boston. And so I did 3 things at that point in time, because I really did feel this emptiness and void from this global view that I had while I was in the military. So one thing I did was I joined a CEO group called Vistage. I had been recruited for that. And so I joined that and was able to meet with CEOs from other large companies, some large public companies, some smaller companies, some companies in my business, architects and colleagues and things like that. But that really helped me just from a professional development standpoint and growing my own capability as a CEO. And then I joined a peer group with there were 10 or 12 contractors from all over the United States in similar businesses, not competitors, but where we could meet twice a year, share experiences, challenges. So again, really trying to make an effort to continue to keep my aperture growing and not kind of succumb to just being in a very limited place with a medium-sized business. And those 2 things really helped me a lot. I was able to really continue, I think, to operate and develop external influences to bring back to my business.
You had mentioned you did 3 things. I don't know if there was a third there.
I did, and I'm trying to remember what the third one was.
Yeah, no worries.
I'll get it. I will. There were 3 things, but I'm trying to. I was also. Yeah.
If it comes back to you, then I'll touch on that again. But it's really interesting. You said those 2 things that you mentioned is certainly a theme that we hear on the show, which is kind of find a peer group, find a tribe per se. So to kind of help you through that process of, the significant identity that had just kind of it doesn't leave, but it changes, right? It changes, whereas you're not involved day to day with it, that being military. So yeah, it's really, really awesome feedback to hear. So I guess now, zooming back to where we had just left off, where you got back from that disaster relief scenario, I'm also guessing that that kind of plugged in a little bit of the military, feeling and sense of purpose. I think you had mentioned that, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, interesting. So what happens next? You get back to your company. Where are you in this point?
Well, and that was, when you think about the dates, that, now it's January 2019, and we had our best year ever in January 2019, and then the next year we're into COVID, and there I was back to you know really having to employ some leadership skills to manage and lead our company through a very uncertain time. And again, it was keeping loyal to our values, keeping the long view, trying to find opportunities, to leverage, by helping the Commonwealth figure out how to safely deploy projects in a COVID environment, helping the industry, and so again, surviving through a very uncertain time. And that was hard work. 2021, and coming out of that, was really now focused more on growing the business. And at this stage, now I'm 60 years old. Today I'm 62, but now thinking, okay, what's my succession plan, and how do I really work on the next generation of leaders at Commodore builders, the next generation of owners, Commodore builders. What's my exit strategy? And I'm spending time working on growing Commodore, top line and bottom line, and developing, employing the exit strategy that we developed, to and what we've put together is kind of a give forward strategy where my job is to pick the next generation of leaders and help them with me execute on our business plan, so that our business plan can fund them to buy me out. And their job is to find their next generation of leaders for them to do the same thing. So what I'm working on now, as well as succession and employing the business plan so that we can effectuate the plan, is the governance that will survive, I hope will survive generations of leaders, so that they stay loyal to that plan.
Amazing. Really interesting. As we're closing out kind of your civilian professional career, I want to plug in translatable skills, military to civilian. I know we've been talking about them throughout your story, but I want to give this kind of opportunity to highlight a few that come top of mind.
I'm sorry. Can you ask that question one more time?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no problem. So translatable skills, military to civilian profession. I know we've mentioned a bunch, throughout your story. I want to just kind of highlight them here.
Yeah. So leading with purpose, I think is probably the principle that I think has been the most valuable for me. Leading with purpose, keeping the long view, so staying on course, and not being distracted or not being knocked off that course by something that comes up, or that, so again, staying on track for the long view. And also one thing that really has helped me with the military is how I lead people and work with people. In the military, particularly when you're in a leadership position, you don't hire and pick your own team. There's a detailing process and an assignment process that's outside of your control. And until you get to a very senior place where you are plugged into that. But when you're a battalion commander, you kind of get who you get. They're assigned to you, and you have them for a couple of years. Mm-hmm. And so I learned in those situations how to figure out how to make sure that people are supported and motivated, and how to get the most out of employees that way, as opposed to giving up on them. Or it's not like in the civilian sector you just go and fire someone. That's a process. And there were, for the most part, I worked with some really talented and great people, but when there was a problem kind of assignment, we figured it out, and made sure that we could put that person in a place where they could add value and excel. And that's really made me much more willing to invest in people development, and not to give up on someone at first blush.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really interesting point. Definitely makes a lot of sense, especially from your perspective. And, with that, given your military career and civilian career, I want to ask advice on growth in both sectors, military and civilian.
You're talking about personal growth?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there are some shared principles. I was talking to a friend and a business owner that owns a construction business, and he was talking to me about how should he pick the person that runs the construction business, because it currently didn't have one person. They had 2 or 3 senior people that were kind of running it by committee, but he felt like there needed to be a CEO type person. Mm-hmm. And he was not sure if any of the people that were on the senior committee had what it took to be that person. And I cautioned him about looking outside to hire someone to do that. And I said to him, what I learned in the military is if people surprise you. There are some people that, as mid-grade officers, I didn't see a lot of spark or aptitude, that became really good division managers or division heads, or key staff, or executive officers or commanding officers. And part of it was the leadership that they were given, the mentorship that they were given, and the training they were given. And I said, maybe these people that you don't know whether or not they can get to that level, maybe it's because they're at that level right now, that they're doing what they're doing, and they don't have the capacity to do what they're doing and think more like a CEO. And maybe you should go through a process and figure out who's interested and who you can pick. But then, send them to, a Harvard business program or some kind of an advanced leadership program, to give them the principles and the network and the framework to allow them to start thinking like a CEO, and then give them the mentorship and leadership that they need so that they can do it. And if you do it that way, I think they'll surprise you.
That brings me back to when you mentioned, your transition period when you finish your military service and finding those peer groups, and it kind of allowed you, that network of people and thought and growth, essentially, right? So, yeah, that's great advice.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I think more people are critical and unwilling to see the capacity that someone has. And the question is, what can you do to unleash that capacity? And I think that the structure in the military allows you to do that, because you're giving people not just an understanding of the support they have, what's around them, and what their own role is, but also in the military, there's an awful lot of training. that goes along with it. So when you have someone that's assigned to be a commanding officer, they go to prospective commanding officer training, before they take command. Someone that becomes an operations officer, they go to prospective officer training, right? Ops officer training, and so they're given a lot of the knowledge and lessons learned, and they're not just forced to learn it from scratch. And so that to me was a big takeaway, and something that in business we should do more of.
Yep, definitely tracks. Makes sense. Great advice. Before we go to our final questions, I wanted to see if I missed anything, or if you want to add anything, whether it's military or civilian career.
No, we talked about an awful lot. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's a lot of it's come out. I mean, and for me, the question is what's next. And I look at many of my retired, people that retire after 20 or 30 years in the military still have some gas in the tank and some time in their life to work, and so but they're working into their 60s and even mid to late 60s. But then they do retire, and so. I'm still trying to understand what that looks like for me. I haven't defined it yet.
Yeah.
But I've joined a number of boards, for-profit boards and not-for-profit boards, and I'm really becoming a student of governance, which is helping me and informing me on how I set the long-term governance for Commodore builders. Now, how do I manage the business 5 years from now when I'm not CEO anymore and I'm chairman? What's the appropriate way to do that? So I think that seems to me to be the next kind of generation of my journey.
Well, that's an exciting time to be in. That's for sure. So going to our final two questions, we'll start with what your wellness practice, what your health practice looks like, and kind of what you'd recommend.
Well, I remember when I'm in better shape now than I was when I was in my 30s.
Love to hear that. Yeah.
Well, and the reason is, in my 30s, I was working full time on my career. I had young children, and I was coaching them in sports and trying to spend as much time as I could spend with my family. And I had a military career in the reserve, and I didn't have time, and so, my annual physical fitness test, I was able to pass it. I was never in bad shape, but I was probably 10 to 15 pounds heavier than I am today. My first real getting back into shape, because I worked out in high school and college, but it was when I went to the Middle East, I came back in the best shape of my life at the age of 45. And since then, I've been pretty loyal to the gym, to cardio, exercise. And what really helps me is, for the last 8 years, I've been riding in the Pan Mass Challenge. The Pan Mass Challenge is a 185-mile bike ride over 2 days. And it's actually the largest single fundraiser in the world.
Wow.
They raise money for cancer. They've actually, in 2024, they went over the $1 billion mark for what they've raised. And they raise somewhere between 60, 70 million a year. So I love doing it because I love raising money and it's a great cause. But I also love doing it because it's always the first weekend in August. And in the first weekend of August, after training for that, every one of my suits fits me.
That's a good outcome.
Yeah. But training really helps me to stay in shape. So sometimes I'll bike to work, or bike
Awesome.
to the golf course. And I'm still working out with weights. Just again, as you get older, it becomes more important to keep those muscles going. And so and frankly, when I get away from it, because sometimes I'll get busy or get in a slump or miss 2 or 3 weeks. The mental impact that a good workout gives me is really, really helpful. It helps me sleep better at night. It helps watching my diet, making sure that, again, that I keep my heart beating at a certain rate and get it up there and get a good sweat. And so I think it's important.
Yeah, that's great. That sounds like an awesome charity and race. I'm gonna look that up. I'll add the link in the show notes as well if anyone's interested. So, final question here is: any book or books that you'd like to recommend?
Well, I did grab a couple. This book, Younger Next Year, was life changing for me 15 years ago. And it's a book written by a physician and one of his patients, and chapter by chapter they alternate about what some of his practices were and what the physiological effects and the health effects of it are. And so it really broke down a lot. It made me understand a lot about working out, and that has actually led to, and I'm not done with it yet, but I'm reading the Peter Attia book, Outlive, which is a book about lifelong wellness. And that's really important to me at this stage of my life. I mean, I do want to live a long life, but I want to live a healthy life. One book that was really important to me as a mid-grade naval officer was Execution by Larry Bossidy and Ram Charan. These guys were big executives of companies like GE. And it was really about getting things done, but execute. And it's funny, at Commodore Builders, when we founded it, we used to say execution first, charm second. You need them both, but you need them in that order, right? So getting things done.
That's good.
And then this book here, What Got You Here Won't Get You There, a book by Marshall Goldsmith. And this really accentuates the fact that, how do you avoid the Peter principle, right? Just because some practices and some skill sets and some things have gotten you to a certain level, to get to the next level might take a different approach. And what are those things at different levels that you might need? So those are a few of the books that I think that have been helpful to me. I would like to find the time to read more, fiction and other kinds of books as opposed to just self-help and organizational books. But right now I'm still in that kind of mode.
Yeah, I hear you. I'm also constantly stuck in that mode, even though I would like for some fiction. I do use audiobooks though, in case you ever try, because it just allows you to kind of absorb more, right? Because you don't have to be sitting there with using your hands. You can listen while you're driving and such.
Yeah, one book that was important to me in my career too was Stephen Covey, The 7 Habits. I still refer to those, particularly that habit of seek to understand and then be understood, which helps you learn to listen before you speak. I'm not very good at that, but I know that I need to do that. And of course, books about emotional quotient, emotional intelligence, things beyond just IQ.
Awesome. Those are some great recommendations. I'll have those books in the show notes as well. I'm definitely going to be adding some of those, if not all of them, to my list. Joe, this was really an amazing conversation. I learned a ton. I really appreciate your time twice, right? The part 1 and part 2. Thank you very much for joining the show.
Well, I appreciate that, Adam. And I thank you for your interest and for listening.
Absolutely. Joe, please hang on when we stop the recording for a minute. We'll see everyone real soon. Take care. Thank you to our channel sponsors, Jet.Build. If you're looking for ways to better manage your real estate development and construction projects, look no further. Jet is the command center software for end-to-end real estate development and construction management. That's www.jet.build.